Hi, let's take a look at setting up the model before we go into Substance Painter. So I'll begin with a little concept. This little thumbnail is something I've had for ages, and I thought I'll take it a bit further, so just did a little bit of sketching to figure out the details. I like the main shapes already, so it was just about figuring out kind of how may the handle look, how does the little bit here look, and then the more of a precise shape of the blade itself. Brought that in. If I click 1 on the numpad, it's kind of sort of lines up. And this is what I have. This is just my blocking, so all this is doing is kind of letting me figure out the proportions and the sizes, even though the concept is close enough. But when you see it in 3D, there might be a few changes. For example, how does the handle fit in with these different parts? How thick does this need to be to look okay? Can I still do these kind of shapes that I want, or do I need something a bit more flat? It's just a few design decisions still to do at this stage. But there's my block, and it does have all the parts that I need, and then I could continue modeling on forward. So for the previous simpler meshes that we've textured in this course, this was pretty much what I was kind of bringing in. Obviously this is still too low detail, but the basic premise was this. So you could have a low poly mesh with hard edges, and then you can export with these hard edges, because otherwise, if I turn auto smoothing, okay, I didn't like that. I've done it, guys. I've crashed Blender. Anyway, so again, if I turn the auto smoothing off, you'd see it's a bit of a mess. So I have it on. For something simple as this, it was enough to adjust this a little bit to get the sharp edges where I want. Otherwise, you'd have to go in to your selections, Control E, and mark sharp, which will give you this clear blue line. And then even if I set this all the way to high, this is the sharp one. So that's way too, if you need to be a bit more precise than just auto smoothing. But then you can export this and just select to export edges. Let's see if I go to export. If I go in here, you have your geometry. I will just choose edges here, and I'll get the sharp edges. Anyway, so after this is done, I need to add a bit more detail. So let's look at my mid detail. So at this stage, I want to have a mesh that smoothes nicely. So this is a bit specific for me because I am not a huge fan of sculpting. So what I like to do is to make my mid poly, high poly mesh kind of nice and smoothed, so I don't have to make these kind of edges in the sculpting phase. So I'll have a nice high poly smooth mesh at this stage that I can sculpt on just to add a few details. So that's what's kind of going on here. You see, I tried adding this little shape that I've had here that I thought would look cool, add a bit of asymmetry to the blade, but it doesn't always work out. So use it to just try it out, see if it works. Got a simpler handle, but also I thought it's just a bit boring because I kind of dislike these because usually, as it is in here, these are just cylinders kind of stacked on top of each other. And while it does read as if it's wrapped around, I think it's still kind of boring. So don't like that. Instead, I tried making this kind of pattern, which is done in a fairly simple way. Just a few modifiers. So what's happening here? Let me try this. So this is the mesh I have. Let's turn everything off. This is the mesh I have. And that's the only mesh that makes up the whole handle. So first I will array it up, then I will array to the side, and then I'll use simple deform to, well, deform with the bend, and then kind of see how many degrees I need to turn. For this, I don't know, is this the, let me see if it's the mesh. No, it's not even the mesh name, so I probably have an empty. If I create an empty, I can assign that as the pivot, so that I can still sort of move it around a little. Maybe it's not perfectly in the middle. So while this does make a sort of perfect circle, it's not exactly what I want. But that's where we fix it in the next step, which is the lattice. So lattice is just a lattice created. We'll click 1 to adjust it. Click 3 to adjust it from the other side. So I have a rough lattice around it, and then I just apply it here. Modifier, select the lattice, and then I can move the lattice. Tab. I can move the lattice around to shape this. So I'm basically squeezing it, so it's not a perfect circle, but more of a ellipse. Subdivision is obviously just subdivision. So of course you have the gaps, but that's just I need to duplicate, move it, and rotate it a little bit, which is just just a second little mesh with all the same modifiers, just adjusted. So it's not perfect how it fits together, but it does the job pretty well. So I did some wrapping, but I actually wrapped so under over. I think it's a bit of a nicer result. Here I also did some wrapping, which is just parts like this kind of wrapping in on itself. Nothing much else in there, just adding a few loops so it smoothes and gets the round edge that I want. I'm exaggerating this. If this is metal, it would be sharper, but for smaller props and overall, you want to exaggerate these things, so when you zoom out, you see you still get a nice edge. Otherwise, you'd be a bit stuck. Not stuck, but you'd get 3 pixels and it would look kind of ugly. If you're wondering what this is just it's curved, and it's like one of the anyway, rectangle. Yes, okay. So it's just a curved rectangle, and that's how I made these in the beginning. So if I create a path, I like using paths just because of kind of how they behave. And if you go in here, which is the properties, under geometry, you can select the taper object, which is exactly not what I wanted. You have to, in the bevel, you want to go into object and then select this. And you see, now this is the shape of this, but you still have the curve. So it's just a nice, easy way to wrap these guys around, and then if you want to rotate, it's Ctrl T, and you can twist it around. With Alt S, you can scale it up and down. So you see how easy it is to just control a few points and make these instead of making them from polygonal mesh. Yeah, the point with this is to prepare myself for sculpting. This is nice, clean, smooth. Just one thing also to keep in mind. I quickly jump back into here. You see I have uneven polygons. That might come and bite me when it comes to sculpting, because if I'm subdividing, this gets subdivided into 4, right? So I keep getting these rectangles. So then if I'm adding details in a certain way, a certain direction, it's gonna bite me in the ass because the polygons are not even. So for something like this, I still went in a bit later and did some cleanup. Let's check out, oh, not the sculpt, the detail. You see, well, from here it looks okay, but here it's not. So I would need to add a bit to try and make this out of squares as much as possible. You could use all the remesh functions and everything, but since I've made this nice and clean, I wanna kind of keep that subdivided. Nice poly mesh. Let's check out the sculpt and see if I can just, yeah. So see, it's a bit dirty. It's like not very even here or anything, but there's enough polygons here that when it gets smoothed a couple of times, I'm gonna be able to add all the details I want in here. Let's check out here. You see, I've adjusted here much more to get quads, but also much more looking like a square and not a rectangle. So that's going to be the case in a lot of these. The curves I have converted into meshes, which is just object convert into mesh. Once you're on the curve, there's a few options in there. Let's see, just so I don't miss out. So there's a few options in here. Once you have your curve, you have your resolution, and then you have your resolution here. So this is kind of how high poly the curve is going to be. Let me quickly show you so it's very clear. For an object, click this. I'll just like this because I want to turn on wireframe. So you see now it's kind of dense. I usually like setting this to 4 just as a starting point. A little less dense. And you don't have the other one anymore because we are using this. Otherwise, if you want, if say you just did a round, in some cases that might be okay, then this is your resolution as well. Of course you can't, well, you can get square, but it's a little bit rotated, and we can try twisting it 45 degrees. I just input 45 on my numpad, but you can't scale it as far as I know. See, if I use S and scale, it doesn't really scale. Alt S doesn't really let you input any direction, so you're stuck with a square. So that's why I use this guy. Let's jump back to the sculpt. So yeah, so the few changes I have done is adding more edge loops to all my meshes. So the detail is just a little bit more evenly distributed. With that done, I prepare the mesh for exporting into Substance Painter, which of course means having a low poly mesh. This mid detail, in an ideal scenario, I'd be able to use this as to export into. So this, without the subdivisions, should be sort of my export into Substance Painter and used as my low poly. that's in an ideal world. I could just delete these guys, sort of simplify, get rid of the unnecessary loops, kind of clean up the mesh, the usual. And that would be the export. But I move the meshes around just a little bit, added some details, so you can see my actual low poly. So it's just a cleaner mesh, getting rid of the unnecessary edge loops. If you're wondering what the red is just the UV seam. This was just kind of a follow along. Don't need this. At first I thought I'm going to maybe manage to use this and then bake the details, but I didn't like how straight it is. So let's hide that. That's unused. What I ended up using is this, which was kind of a bit dirty and tricky to get. So see, I have just enough detail to get a nice bake off of the high poly. This is still my high poly. I used it as a base, as a guide to make this. And the way I did it is just I applied some of the modifiers, of course not the subdivision one, and then I deleted. If you remember back in here, I just grabbed these guys. I deleted the rest. And then I ended up combining all of them and sort of manually merging them together. So it was quite important to get a decent enough result in here. So it's just a bit easier to make a connection. I don't know, there's probably a better way of doing it, but that was what I kind of figured out at the time. So if I hide this, this is how the low poly handle looks. And it's low poly enough. It follows the shapes quite well on the very detailed sculpt. Well, very detailed in my case. As you see, the sculpt is more or less just for surface imperfections. It's nothing crazy. I'm just messing up a bit the edges. Just adding a few strokes here to indicate what kind of material it is. Knife sharp, handle bumpy, this kind of hammered. Just a few little things to make it a little more interesting. Back to low poly. Basically a toned down version of my sculpt mesh. Not that I'm counting polygons on this, but just, to keep the good habits going. There's a lot of deleting of polygons that are invisible, like here. Here it kind of goes through, that's all right. Didn't want to split it too much in there, but kind of just trying to see if anywhere stands out. And in this case, it worked out to have all edges smooth. So unlike the other way where I don't bake from a high poly, here it worked out having the edges smooth. In some cases, you do need to have hard edges when you're baking. That comes more in hand with kind of mesh. It's usually a hard surface. So you see the blade here, I have a harder edge, because if I don't, it's not going to bake nicely. It's going to look really, really ugly. And I believe the little rule is wherever you have a hard edge, you want to have a seam in your textures. But not everywhere where you have a seam that you need a hard edge. As you see here, I have a seam, soft edge, but the angle is not crazy enough for me to need a hard edge and the mesh, so it bakes nicely. You run into all these kind of things when baking. So if I expand this, if you ignore these guys, they're not part of it, you'll see all of the meshes have an underscore low. All the different meshes underscore low. And if I open the high poly, it's going to be the same thing, but all the meshes have an underscore high. So that's my final high poly. Don't know why it doesn't want to let me. Oh, there we go. Weird, didn't let me select it. But yeah, I sculpt just the multi-res modifier. So the reason I have low and high is so, you know, when I select it all, export it high, select it all, export low. In Substance Painter, I can select so the baking happens from, you know, ring low, from ring high to ring low. What that does is creates much cleaner bakes, because otherwise you have these intersections here, and I don't want, when the detail is being baked from this, any of this kind of stuff to be picked up. So what it does is bakes from this onto the, onto the low poly ring, and ignores all the intersections here, or ignores the meshes. And you can still bake the ambient occlusion included with these, so that's not a problem as well. So yeah, that's just for cleaner bakes. It's a bit of a setup, but I find it quite worth it. And that's about it for this stage. Move on to Substance Painter now to show how I've approached texturing this piece.